Hi there, everybody. Welcome to day... I've already lost count. We're what, 4 days in? Is this day 4? Yeah, day 4, and I already lost count a little bit. Today, we're going to get into a bit of a video that I filmed yesterday and teased yesterday all about the start of this crazy listening project and viewing project that I've undertaken, going through media from 1900 all the way to 1909, and watching and listening to them in context with, like, learning about world events around that time. So yep, I'll jump cut you right into the second half of the footage I shot yesterday. Over these last couple months, I've gone through the first decade of the 20th century. I've just finished the 1909 portion of media I'm going through. So one of the reasons I started my last listening project slash viewing project in 1914 was because I kind of thought, well, the first decade of the 20th century was just sort of a continuation of the 19th century, but boy, was I wrong. The 20th century is, of course, known for the breakneck pace of technical innovation, and this first decade here was exception. Like, when the century began, only a few wealthiest of the wealthy owned any sort of automobile, and those automobiles that they would own back in those days would have struggled to keep up with the horse-drawn carriages of the day. But by the end of the 1900s, by the end of, I'm talking 1909, we're dealing with, like, examining military applications for aircraft. Of course, the Wright brothers flew their first flight in, I want to say, 1903. I know, I just went through all this and I'm already hazy on the details. But over the years, they expanded on the technology. Many other people joined in. In 1909, actually, the first flight across the English Channel was completed. And heavier-than-air flight suddenly was possible. At the beginning of this decade, there were many people who said it is not scientifically possible to fly in a heavier-than-air craft, and the Wright brothers and many others would prove them wrong. And I've talked about examining military application for aircraft, but also, right at the end of this decade, the Wright brothers were given $1 million grant, that's huge money in those days, to explore the applications for possible commercial flights. And yeah, like I said, automobiles in 1900 were few and far between, but as that decade went through, auto racing actually became extremely popular, and in 1907, there was a massive race around the world which captivated readers of newspapers and such around the world as people would love getting the updates of who was in the lead. They had competitors for different countries. The American entrant wound up winning that race, but I suggest y'all look up what happened in that race, because there was a lot of alleged cheating and weird stuff going on. So it's hard to say who really won that. People have posted some great YouTube clips of some of the home media that was available at the time. Now, there was home media out there in the first decade of the 20th century. There were, drumroll please, cylindrical records. These are actual old Edison Blue Amberol cylinder records. I do not have a device that can play these, and these are from a little bit later in 1919, just giving you an example of the kind of media that was around. Look at this portrait of Thomas Edison here. The media that was around at that time. But yeah, if you wanted media for home consumption, your options were records like that. There were some disc-based records as well. Just buying sheet music, which of course, I don't know if that's considered a form of home media nowadays, but obviously sales of that are still, well, I don't know how strong they're going, but sales of popular tunes as sheet music is still going strong today. And then the third one, and the one that I was most fascinated with, are those player piano rolls you see. When I was on tour one time, I stayed at a friend's house who actually had a player piano from the first decade of the 20th century. But yeah, you used to be able to, in fact, you still kind of can order these online if you happen to have a player piano out there. But yeah, in the first decade of the 20th century, if you were wealthy enough to own a piano with these capabilities, you could get some of the popular tunes at the time for piano roll, set it up in your piano, and it would play the keys itself. These were also popular at Nickelodeons back in the day. Now, a Nickelodeon is pretty much a blanket name for pretty much any facility that allowed you to access entertainment using a nickel. Nickelodeon has meant a lot of things over the years. You might think of it as meaning a jukebox, which is what it would come to mean by the 1930s or 40s or so. Before that, it was a place where you could watch movies. And then even before that, I think there were places where you could put a nickel into a player piano and it would play for you. And let's talk a little bit about the music that was around in the first decade of the 1900s. Now, probably the most popular kind of music is that is being composed for what we would now call like classical music, symphonies and stuff like that. And also opera, very popular genre. I know that Enrico Caruso is making a lot of money by recording some of his operatic work onto wax cylinders like I just showed you. But there was a new and interesting genre out there for sure, led by Scott Joplin, who in 1899 wrote the famous Maple Leaf Rag, that and of course The Entertainer, which honestly people these days may be more aware of as Ice Cream Truck Song. These are like considered nowadays as almost comically primitive songs, but at the time the genre was revolutionary, and it was one of the first genres that introduced a large amount of syncopation into pop music that was being enjoyed in America. Not only did this genre introduce new syncopations and new excitement into popular music that was not there before, it was really the first mainstream African-American music that would have a big impact on mainstream popular culture. And Scott Joplin became a huge celebrity, actually. He would actually play at the White House, at least on one occasion. Had many hit tunes, and again, like I said earlier, his hit tunes would have been released as piano rolls and as sheet music. Scott Joplin actually did not make any recordings during his lifetime, which is a major shame. By the end of this decade, composers like James Scott and Joseph Lamb are taking up the genre as well, and eventually, in later decades, this would be refined into a brand new genre known as jazz. So jazz has its earliest roots, not its earliest roots, but its earliest mainstream popular roots in ragtime, really. And speaking of jazz's early roots, the blues is also coming together. W.C. Handy, famous blues composer, has just had his first piece, the Memphis Blues, be transcribed in 1909. I've been watching some of the earliest of the early silent films from the 1900s. Yes, the motion picture industry was actually a burgeoning industry by the end of the first decade of the 20th century. When I started going through media from the year 1900, motion pictures were definitely in their infancy. There was, of course, a filmmaker whose name I'm going to totally butcher here, but he's one of the most important filmmakers of all time, Georges Méliès. I'm going to totally mess that up. He, of course, famously in 1901 made A Voyage to the Moon, or Un Voyage dans la Lune. Again, sorry, I did a terrible job of French there. Really, like, even in the late 1890s, he was making these incredible fantasy movies that used camera trickery. He was one of the first people who realized you could use these new moving picture cameras for more than just capturing the world around you, but you could do these complicated physical edits, like we're talking with scissors and stuff, to create these amazing atmospheric pieces of film. Y'all should go watch A Voyage to the Moon if you haven't already. It's very cool. Now, his movies were not made for movie theaters. There were no movie theaters during the first part of his career, at least no modern theaters as we would now consider them. While some films of this era did use projectors, a lot of these early movies were using these sort of peep show-like devices, like the kinetoscope, which would effectively put all of the frames of the moving picture sort of like a flip book for you. It was like lit on the inside, and it would flip through pages so that if you put your eyes in these little binocular looking things, you could watch the movie happening before your eyes. And that's one of the things that Méliès, I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, early 1900s film enthusiasts, if anybody's watching, but I believe that a lot of his early movies were made for kids, and that some of those devices were placed in certain places that thought that kids might get bored. I don't know exactly specifically where, like, so maybe the parents are out shopping, and in order to amuse your kids, they just put them by this box, the early form of the boob tube, you know, putting the kids in front of this box where they could just put nickels in the little thing and watch these early movies. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Mellies had such an imaginative world and was making these comedies and these larger-than-life adventures, because that's what kids were really enjoying. And who knows, maybe some of those kids, in fact, definitely some of those kids, would grow up fascinated with motion picture technology and maybe want to go into that field themselves. In 1905, the first motion picture Nickelodeon theater was built in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and by the end of the decades, what we would now consider as a typical movie theater was very common in lots of major cities, particularly in the United States and Canada. These were all still silent movies. We actually wouldn't get movies that were synced with audio all the way until 1927, which I think is peculiar, that the technology for recording audio and for recording moving pictures were around for so long before it became an industry standard practice to combine the two into one form of media. Very interesting. Thomas Edison was also, well, he wasn't making movies, really. He was being what we would now call an executive producer, putting up the money to filmmakers to make movies in the early parts of the 1900s. But by the end of the 1900s, more and more filmmakers are taking up the job, as suddenly there's a tremendous amount of money in the film industry because those Nickelodeons are becoming popular, and it's sparking many debates when it comes to, like, copyright law, which were far from sorted out by the end of 1909. Probably the most popular director towards the end of that decade was D.W. Griffith, who was just starting to make his early films back then with such early film stars as Florence Lawrence, and in 1909 we see the very first films starring the icon Mary Pickford. Now, D.W. Griffith absolutely deserves to be canceled, and if we're talking people who need to be canceled, it's everybody that I'm talking about here. This is truly a terrible time when it comes to, like, human rights violations, and it's not good. It's not good, and I'm sorry to be glorifying this era. I'm just fascinated by the process of developing all these technologies that we know and love today. And yeah, just a really interesting time period for media that, again, going into this, I had no idea what had been released between 1900 and 1909, and that's one of the reasons I didn't do it in my last listing project, is because I was like, I don't know if there's anything that I would find interesting from that time period, but boy was I wrong. I found a lot of cool stuff and really have enjoyed this. I'm going to be moving into 1910. I don't know if I'm going to talk any more about this during VEDS, but I'm having myself a blast learning all this stuff. I want to go right through from these early days to now, and by the time I finish this project, I'm going to be, like, probably in my 40s, but I'm going to have had a nice time. And yeah, that's about it. I just wanted to tell you this truly absurd thing I've been doing. Thank you for watching. Check out my description where you can find links to where you can find my music, where it's sold or streamed online. There's also links down there to the channels of all the other wonderful fellow VEDSies who are with me in this project of making a video every day this month. Like this video if you liked what you saw, subscribe to my channel if you've been enjoying my videos, and ring the notification bell too if you want to be notified whenever I upload a new video, which will be tomorrow, and like I said, every day for the rest of this month. I'll see you again tomorrow.